Hi, everyone. This is Tim Moore, Chairman of the Planning Board. I'd like to take a few minutes of your time and talk about the zoning ordinances which are proposed for the 2020 town meeting. We have 15 of them. A lot of them are housekeeping. Some are a little more detailed, and hopefully everyone get a chance to look at the voter's guide because there are detailed explanations in the voter's guide of what the zoning ordinances do. So quickly run through them. The first amendment is defining a retail business. We already have a definition in there, and it references goods and or services that are sold directly to a consumer. It was always implied that that would also include renting goods and services. But to make that perfectly clear, we added the phrase "or rental." So the proposed change now would say where goods and or services are sold or rented out directly to the ultimate consumer. The second change is another definition, and that is for trade business. That would be businesses such as electricians, plumbers, HVAC contractors, etc. The key is it does not include businesses that have any outside storage. So if your business is contained within the building, then you would qualify for a trade business. The third amendment is another definition change, and that is regarding change of use. And this one is a little more wordy, a little more complicated. But the proposed change to the change of use would say a change of use occurs when an existing permitted use in any particular zone is changed to another permitted use in that same zone. If the zoning officer determines that the change of use is more intense or significantly different, then the the applicant would have to come before the planning board for a site plan approval. So if it's just a simple change of use from one permitted use to another, then the building inspector can do that, code enforcement officer can do that on his own. There's no need to come to the planning board. If there's a significant change in that, then the site plan application would be required and planning board review would take place. The next Amendment 4 change is regarding driveway locations, and this one, the proposed change is to allow a driveway on either, if the parcel has or subdivision has entrances on two different public roads, then the change allows you to put the driveway where it makes most sense. So it still requires 150 feet of frontage on a public way, but there's sometimes there's topography or wetlands where even though there's a large frontage, it's impossible to build and put a driveway on that where that frontage is. So if there is frontage on another road, even if there's access to another road, this driveway could be put there. So again, the change was to allow driveways access on the right of way that makes the most sense. Causes less disturbance to wetlands and other natural features. The fifth change to the zoning amendment is again dealing with public roads, and this one is regarding public roads and the planned residential development. And we'll see in a few minutes where the planned residential development ordinances proposed a few changes there too. And when we get to that change, I'll point out the difference between the public and private roads. So the Amendment 5 by itself just defines when you can have public and or private roads. And we'll see on a diagram a little bit in a few minutes. Amendment 6 deletes motels from all permitted uses in all districts. Pretty straightforward. Amendment number 7, again, this time going back to the trade business. As you recall, Amendment 2 defined what a trade business was. Amendment 7 says that you can have a trade business in the Commercial 1 zone, which is along 125, the industrial zones, which are either along the railroad tracks or at the Plaistow-Kingston line just off 125, or the integrated commercial residential district, which is essentially Route 108. And there's a note there in the warrant language that says this proposed amendment is void if Article Z20-2 does not pass. So what that means is if the definition does not pass, then by default this article becomes null and void. So you can't, we don't want to list a permitted use where there's no definition for that use. So they kind of run together. The next change, Amendment 8, allows a personal service business, which is already defined in Article 2, and includes things like barbershops, hair salons, etc., as a permitted use in the Commercial 2 and Village Center districts. So our Village Center district runs from the south at the library northward along 121A or Main Street to the crossing at the Little River. The Commercial 2 area district is the rest of Main Street from the library south to the intersection of 125 at the Haverhill line. Amendment number 9 is looking at structures to house animals. So our current ordinance defines structures, including but not limited to barns, sheds, and stables, used to house any farm animals must be at least 100 feet from all property lines. And then we also say in the ordinance that if you have a corral, the corral can be 50 feet from the property line. So we're changing that to kind of eliminate that inconsistency to say structures, including but not limited to barns, sheds, and stables used to house farm animals must be contained within the corral structure. If there is no corral, the building structure must be at least 100 feet from all property lines. So in other words, if you have a corral and you have a barn or a shed within that corral, the corral only needs to be 50 feet. If you don't have a corral, then it must be 100 feet. Article 10 is regarding the planned residential development, and a lot of sort of definition changes, consistency changes, but for the most part, it tries to eliminate some confusion about where the perimeter buffer is. And so in the zoning ordinance, in the voter's guide, you will see a diagram that looks similar to this. And the striped area around the perimeter is the 50-foot perimeter buffer. So no structures can go in that buffer. The black area is where the actual building and roads take place. So no building or structure closer than 50 feet to the property line. At the bottom, the white area is where you would have the public or private roads. And at the very bottom, although the diagram doesn't indicate it, that's where an existing public road would be. So going back to where public and private roads concerning, you can have a private road into the planned residential development as long as that private road terminates in the planned residential development in this black area. If there were another public street along the top, and one of the streets in the planned residential development went through the planned residential development and exited onto another public street, then that would have to be a public road connecting both streets through the planned residential development. The other changes are sort of definitions. One of them is changing just the term dwellings to dwelling units. That's just for consistency. Second one is regarding the edge of where you can put structures. So the existing language says all the structures must be at least 30 feet between the edge of the nearest private right-of-way and or driveway of any building or structure. And we're changing that to say 30 feet between the edge of any right-of-way and any building or structure. And again, a little more on driveways. The existing language just reads, each dwelling unit must have its own driveway. We're changing that to say each single-family dwelling unit must be served by its own driveway. Each duplex dwelling unit may be served by a common driveway or a separate driveway for each dwelling unit. If it's a multifamily building, each multifamily building must be served by its own exclusive single driveway. So again, more specificity on what types of driveways are allowed. And again, this is within the planned residential development. The planned residential developments, I should have mentioned earlier, are developments that you can cluster the houses closer together, having smaller lot size, but at least 50% of the planned residential development area must be open space. So it's a good way to conserve land. There is a requirement that even though you can cluster the number of houses closer together, overall you cannot have more dwelling units, more houses than would be allowed in a typical grid layout. The next zoning amendment, number 11, is a change to the elderly housing ordinance. And the major change there is the connection to a public way. So the existing language states Class 5 or better roadway, and one of the problems we haven't experienced it in Plaistow, but other towns developers have come in and it just says better roadways. The assumption behind it is a more improved roadway, better quality roadway. But you could define better as maybe a more narrow roadway, a more private roadway. So we're changing the language to say you cannot make a connection to a Class 6 road. So you can connect any way you would like to public roads, but you cannot connect to a Class 6 road. Now, Class 6 roads are town-owned, but they're not maintained. So we have a few of them in town. And if you look at old street maps, you'll see a lot of cases where streets were laid out, but never really implemented. So those are Class 6 roads. You can only build on those with permission from the Board of Selectmen, because and you have a waiver of liability because the roads are not maintained by the town. The other change to the ordinance just states that open space cannot be used towards the unit density calculations. And again, this is the Affordable Elderly Housing Ordinance. There is a change in the density language. No intent to change the density, but the existing language says number of bedrooms, and we're proposing to change that to number of dwelling units. And that's just to be consistent with the New Hampshire DES septic requirements. Also, in the definition of density, it says no more than 6 for every 40,000 square feet. Wasn't clear how you calculated the 40,000 square feet, whether that was the total lot size or buildable area. So we're changing that to say 40,000 feet of buildable area. Buildable area would not include wetlands or steep slopes. So it was always the intent to do that. The developments that have been built under that ordinance complied with that requirement, but we're just clarifying the language so it's in there for everyone to see right up front. The other change to the ordinance is regarding the building cap. So the ordinance basically says that we maintain a number of affordable elderly housing units, and at no point can that exceed 10% of the total dwelling units in Plaistow. So right now there's approximately a little under 3,000 dwelling units in Plaistow. So that would say no, we cannot have any more than 300 affordable elderly housing units. And then there's a long section about what happens when there's a conflict. So if we had 150 units of affordable elderly housing, and the building cap was 300, that would allow an additional 150 units. If a developer came in and was proposing 200 units, then we would inform them right away that they could only do 150. So they would have to take the plan back and modify it to have 150. Now, if somebody had submitted a plan, say for 100 units, and that was underway, being reviewed and processed by the planning board, and somebody else comes in with another 100 or 150 units, which would put them over the cap, then each application gets date and time stamped, and so it's on a first come, first served basis. And the person that comes in first, we would process their application. Once it got approved, then whatever the number of units that were approved for that would be subtracted from the building cap, and then the second person in line would have that number of units available to them. So it's a little complicated, but I think when you read through the language, it makes a little more sense. The 12th Amendment is dealing with another permitted use. So the existing language says artists, craftsmen, daycare, caring for not more than 6 children not living in the home, seamstress, one-chair beauty parlor, teaching, not more than 4 pupils. So in reviewing the language, we really didn't see, there's no rationale for allowing daycare to have no more than 6 and not allowing teaching more than 4. So we changed that language to be consistent. So you can, if you have a daycare under this particular ordinance, you can't have more than 6 children. Or if you're teaching, you can't have more than 6 students or pupils. So just to be consistent there for pretty much the same type of use. The 13th Amendment is dealing with impact fees, and impact fees are defined in the zoning ordinance as they need to be. A few years ago, we changed the fee amounts to be included in the Plaistow Planning Board fee schedule. And so this is just a little bit of cleanup work to take amounts or credits for accessory dwelling units from the zoning ordinance and incorporating them in the Plaistow fee schedule. So 2 changes here, one for the school impact fee and one for the rec impact fee. Just cleaning that up to be consistent, and all of the credits and rates are included in the Plaistow fee schedule. The 14th Amendment is another kind of housekeeping change. And a few years ago, the state passed a law that says if you had a variance or a special exemption granted prior to December 31st, 2013, but not yet exercised by March 30th, 2022, then that variance or special exception shall be considered abandoned. So the previous understanding of variances and special exceptions is that they were good for all time. That was deemed not to be appropriate. So we needed to add this language to our ordinance to be consistent with the state and to allow those variances to expire. So the wording is pretty straightforward, but the reason that it came up is because the state allowed the variances to expire. Also, for new variances, you are allowed to put in expiration dates, so they don't hang around forever if they're not being used. The last amendment, the 15th Amendment, is dealing with changing some of the land to between Commercial 1 and Commercial 2. And again, this diagram is in the voter's guide. So the area that under consideration is at the end of Main Street, right where it intersects 125. So this is Hazeltine Street, and mortgage specialist would be in here. And the 4 lots under consideration for being changed from the current C1 reverting back to C2 are these 4 lots in here. Now the 4 lots in total add up to about 1.5 acres. So very small lots. I think there's only, they are existing lots of record, so It's possible you could make use of one of the lots, but most of them are too small even to do anything with unless they're all combined. So in the voter's guide, we have a description of what the intent of the commercial 1 zone, which again is along 125, and the commercial 2 zone, which is along Main Street, describes some of the characteristics of those zones. And so if you read through that, then decide how appropriately you think that those 4 lots should be, whether they should remain as commercial 1 lots or revert back to commercial 2 lots. And there's also references to our zoning ordinance, which has more intense description of what the zoning requirements are in terms of lot size, lot coverage, and et cetera. So I hope brief explanations have helped a little bit. Again, all of those explanations are in the voter's guide, which will be very helpful if you have a chance to read through that. And however you decide that you might like to vote on that, the important thing is to get out there and vote Tuesday, March 10th, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. at the Pollard School. And thank you very much, and we'll see you at the polls.